Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gabrielle Atchison, and I'm the convener for Talk to Talk program. We welcome one and all to this afternoon's presentation of Preserving an Inclusive Narrative for Younger Generations. Please allow me to share a few logistical norms that will govern our time together. Unless you are one of the panelists or otherwise instructed, we ask all attendees to please put your devices on mute. As our presentation unfolds, please add your questions and comments to the chat box. In that way, we will be sure to capture and respond to them by the end of the program. This event is being recorded and will be available later on UBE's YouTube page and on the website. As is our custom, we begin our time together with prayer. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in our UBE Talk to Talk session today for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your hope, your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Today's panelist is the Reverend Kiana Johnson. She's a librarian and vocational deacon in the Episcopal Church. She graduated from the University of Chicago with a bachelor's in English language and literature and with a master's in library and information science from Dominican University. Her professional and ministry interests involve policy advocacy, particularly related to access to information, economic justice, and racial reconciliation. She's a member of the board of the Historical Society of the Episcopal Church, and her recent research interests include Black women's ordination in the Episcopal Church. Today, Reverend Kiana Johnson will be in conversation with our very own Reverend Kim Coleman, who's been serving as the UBE National President since 2019. Thank you both.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And thanks to everybody who has joined us here today. This is just a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about some things that are happening in our nation, almost hidden in plain view, that have the potential for eroding the future of our Black and Hispanic and other often disenfranchised groups that if we don't take the time to look at it and address what's going on, at least the UBE leadership, and we believe the Episcopal Church will recognize that a serious threat is being posed to our becoming beloved community. I just wanted to start off by telling everyone just a little bit about how UBE's interest was piqued about this topic. Back at our 55th annual business meeting and conference in Montgomery, Alabama, we had the pleasure of having a contingency from the United Kingdom join us for that conference. And one of that contingency was a bishop. And that bishop's name is the Right Reverend Madhu Smitha Prasadam, and she's the Bishop of Huddersfield in the Diocese of Leeds. At the final time for her blessing, closing worship service, she paused for a moment. We've been talking about many of the issues that are related to racism and inequality and injustice in this nation. And she just stopped to pause to recognize and to name for us that her sister had written a book, That's Not My Story, that had been banned. This began us thinking and began the conversation about, so is there anything that UBE should be or can be doing about these bans that really hadn't hit in a wide array, hit the national scene yet? I began having conversations with the government, the Office of Government Relations, and then just still praying through, asking questions, having conversation, when an email appeared in my email box from Miss Kiana Johnson, who I now recognize is the Reverend Deacon Kiana Johnson. And that email was to expose UBE to the American Library Association and the work they were doing to unite against bans, censorship of information books. So we began to have conversation. The UBE decided to join the alliance of Unite Against Bans. And I'm sure Deacon Kiana will update us on, how many organizations. Last time I looked, it was over 100 organizations are in alliance with ALA or with the Unite Against Bans movement. And as part of our conversations together in this new year, we began to wonder whether or not there was a possibility of getting a resolution before General Convention. So that's the introduction to how we got to this day. And I'm going to turn things over now to Kiana and ask her that she would share with us the story of these bans and the vision that ALA and she had for putting it in resolution form, and whatever else she'd like to share with us about preserving the narrative for our younger generations. Kiana.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for inviting me to be part of this conversation. What I wanted to start with is just give a little bit of a background about, number one, who and what the American Library Association is, but also a little bit about book bans and kind of the environment that we had been working in and how that environment has shifted. So the American Library Association is the primary professional organization for librarians and library workers. It's just like the ABA, AMA, just for standard professional organization. And so it does those standard kind of professional organization things such as accreditation of library schools. It provides continuing education, professional development, but it also is very heavily involved in advocacy work for libraries in their communities as well as other work. And so part of this advocacy and support work that ALA does is the monitoring and tracking of challenges to intellectual freedom and protecting the support for libraries and librarians who've received challenges. And let me also define what that means. Just about every library has what they call an opportunity or a request for reconsideration, where someone finds materials within the library that they think are inappropriate or shouldn't be in the library for any various reasons. And so they're invited to submit a form or whatever the process is to have that material be reconsidered. And there are various reasons for that, but often what that is an opening or an invitation for conversation. And so book challenges have always existed. Libraries we have really strong skills and policies around handling those. But around 2021, there are about 1,800 challenges, and this is nationwide across libraries, both public libraries and school libraries. In 2023, that number had jumped up to 4,200, just an absolute explosion in the number of challenges that libraries have been receiving. And two or three things really stand out about the types of materials that are being challenged. First of these is that efforts around these challenges are frequently organized by groups that produce an entire list of materials that they consider to be inappropriate. And they encourage their members to just submit these lists for all of these titles. So in essence, just a bulk challenge. There is a very good chance that people are submitting challenges to books they haven't even read. So they don't know the context of the material that they're challenging. Someone showed them a single sentence out of thousands of words. And so you don't get that fuller context of what was being discussed. Also, with these just kind of lists, people are then encouraged to submit challenges wherever they are or across the country, which means they are possibly putting in challenges for places that they aren't a member of that community. So it's an attempt to kind of do a broad level of censorship around materials in places where they don't have kind of a stakeholder in that community. Another thing to keep in mind about this recent uptick in the number of bans is the types of materials that are frequently making it to these challenge lists. And it's often materials by and about historically marginalized communities. And so these are our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community, or our siblings in that community, as well as Black American stories. So you can start to see where our national conversation is then starting to be reflected in the types of materials that are often the targets of these particular challenges or efforts at censorship. And so some of the titles that have recently made it to that top 10 list are Genderqueer, All Boys Aren't Blue, The Bluest Eye, which is unfortunately a perennial on that list for at least a decade, possibly more. Other recent titles that have made it to that list is The Hate You Give, and then a title called Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. So even the attempts at kind of helping children to understand what's happening in their community, give them a way to be in conversation with their parents or their caregivers about that, even those attempts are being challenged. And so, as I mentioned, the attempts at these book challenges are reflective or mirroring some of the conversations that have been happening at the national level as well. And so libraries and ALA have navigated these book challenges largely internally. As I mentioned, libraries frequently have policies about how they reconsider, or if they reconsider materials, how they kind of support the communities through this. But that's much, much harder when you go from one-ish thousand to multiples of thousand. It just, the onslaught of the ready increase in the number of bans is just overwhelming. And the thing to keep in mind is that these are bans that are reported. ALA has a form that people can submit that they received a challenge, and what sort of and kind of walking through that system. But a lot of times libraries either A, don't know that they have that opportunity, or they don't report. So that number is probably much, much lower than what is actually happening in our communities. So again, that's a number that we have definite data for, but always keep in mind that that number is probably definitely lower than it appears. And so again, libraries and ALA have largely been able to kind of handle this internally, but with that market increase, that's when libraries recognize that having allies amongst our community is really, really valuable. Most of the time when you talk to people, they really aren't in favor of these book bans, particularly these kind of bulk book bans. They recognize the value and the expertise that the libraries have around making selections around the information that their community needs, and that they're active members of that community. And so with that, ALA helped create an organization called Unite Against Book Bans. And so Unite is a grassroots organization that provides tools to its members about how to speak against book challenges and censorship. The first thing that people are always surprised by is, number one, that these challenges are even happening. And so then once folks understand that they're happening, then the next step is, what can I even do in my community to be in opposition to this, to speak in support of my community, or speak in support of my library. And so what Unite does is provide kind of that toolkit for how people can be involved in their local community to support their library and to support the intellectual freedom at their library. It also is a really great tool for helping people be aware of what's even happening in their community. When folks sign up, you put in your zip code or your area, so the system knows where people live. And so then, as notices about conversations at local school boards or local library boards come on board, are coming on, and there's a recognition that there is some challenge to the autonomy of the library, or attempt to kind of more regularly systematize these book challenges, people can come to their local school board, come to their local library board, and have a conversation or speak in support. But first, you have to even know it's happening. And so Unite kind of is that kind of early alert system to help people know about that. But then even if folks find out about it on their own, they have really great tools and techniques to kind of help people kind of gather their notes for themselves about how they can be an advocate or an ally for their library in their own communities. And so in addition to having individual members for Unite Against Book Bans, there is also an opportunity for organizations to become partners for Unite Against Book Bans. And there are large national organizations that have become partners, such as the African American Policy Forum, Color for Change, the Interfaith Alliance, the National Education Association, and now the Union for Black Episcopalians. And again, with these organizational partners, they're saying that, yes, this is something that we care about. We want to support libraries. We want to support intellectual freedom. And we're making kind of that statement that this is something we want to support. So I've done kind of all of this conversation about kind of where we were and how we've gotten to this point where there's such this large number of book challenges and book bans. And so a very valid question might be, so what is the faith connection to this? As Reverend Kim alluded to at the beginning, this impacts our larger church and our community level ability to become beloved community. Because what that requires is hearing and telling the truth, and sometimes it's messy ways. One of the things that the folks who are putting through book challenges are saying, well, this is a story that might make people feel uncomfortable. I don't know if any of us have read the Bible recently, but there are many stories in there that make us feel deeply uncomfortable. We still read them. We still learn from them. There is importance in hearing that deeply uncomfortable history sometimes. And the other thing to keep in mind is that with that hearing of history, these book challenges are opposing materials that are memoirs. So stories about Ruby Bridges are being challenged. That's history. That is an actual fact of what happened. And so we're trying to kind of rewrite history to be a little bit more palatable. But also there are challenges for fiction. And so while it's not true, it is a telling of a lived experience that may be different from our own. And oftentimes what books and information allow people to do is they either get to see their own lived experience reflected back. And so that can be really affirming, but it also provides an opportunity for people to see into a life that's different than theirs. And what that does is it helps build empathy in our communities. There are many lived experiences that I don't have, but books and both fiction and nonfiction allow me as an individual that opportunity to see into someone else's life, see where we may have moments of commonality or ways that we're similar, and again, to kind of deepen that opportunity to become beloved community. And so what I also mentioned is these book challenges and censorship are often interwoven with attempts at revisionist history. Again, the trying to make our past more palatable. Invariably, history gets forgotten when we try to kind of paper over things, and it allows the opportunity for our mistakes as a community, as a country, to kind of keep repeating if we try to paper over what actually happened. And the other really important thing for us all to keep in mind is that these book challenges have the unintended and sometimes perhaps intended consequence of making people feel that their stories and even their selves are being excluded from the community, that they as an individual, something about them is so dangerous that the community needs to be protected from them. And this can be both for the Black American community, but also the LGBT community, that's telling particularly young people that who they are bringing to the world is dangerous and the world needs to be protected from them. And I think that's a slippery slope and a dangerous kind of message to allow children and young people to hear. So in support of that, and I believe everyone might have seen this going around, but if not, I want to share it as well. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Because what a number of us have done is put together a resolution for a general convention. And what this does is it gives us the opportunity as a larger church to say that we as a church value intellectual freedom. We as a church recognize that people should have access to the information that they need And the really important thing about that is choice. Yes, there are books that an individual family or an individual person may say, this is not quite right for me, or this isn't quite right for my family. That doesn't mean that that book doesn't have a place in someone else's life, and they need to have the opportunity to even be able to discover that information and to absorb it. I think we also have to recognize that kids are pretty smart, and they can figure out when something isn't for them, and they can see something, recognize in themselves that they're not at a particular moment where they're ready for that. And that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that we as humans are constantly developing and evolving. And so it's really hard to say what's inappropriate for a particular age. What may be appropriate for a 10-year-old here is going to be completely different than what's appropriate for a 10-year-old somewhere else. It's basically they're bringing their whole selves into relationship with literature and information. And what their parents should be doing, and what libraries are helping them do, is figure out where they are kind of on their developmental journey to find materials that are going to be appropriate to them. And so what this resolution does is it tries to, number one, recognize why the church cares about this, the dangers of censorship in our communities, and that value of free expression and the free exchange of information. I'll scroll a little bit more. And so what the resolution also calls for is the support of the Office of Government Relations, dioceses, local parishes, to be kind of involved in their communities in terms of opposing these book challenges. The first thing that we all just need to know, and I hope this conversation is part of that, is that even knowing that these things are happening in our local community, oftentimes these kind of fly under the radar. No one knew, and that's okay. We all have busy lives. But now that we know that this is a thing that's happening, how do we get involved in our local community? And I think this is one of these moments where we're actively called as Christians to be involved in our community. If we want others to have access to that information, what that means is we have to show up for school board meetings. We have to show up at library board meetings. We have to be willing to voice our support of this open access to information. And figuring out how to do that at the larger federal level is really important. But not oftentimes, right now, most of these challenges are happening in our local communities. So we have to be involved locally. But knock on wood, it's not happening at the federal level, but it's important for us to kind of keep an eye on it, because what starts at the local level goes up to the national level. And so I think at this point, I will stop, because that's what I had to share, because I definitely want to make sure that we have time for conversation and questions that folks might have, either about kind of the larger landscape around book challenges, or anything else that may be kind of at top of mind for them right at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Kiana. We've got a couple questions in the chat box. So I will start with the first one that I see here, which is, does the challenge temporarily ban the book until the decision is made, or is it free to circulate?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it largely depends on the community in which the challenge took place. For some libraries, if there's a challenge, the material is immediately removed while it's being reviewed. In other places, even though there's a challenge, it'll remain available while the process is going through. So it largely depends on that local community. And that's a really great thing to kind of keep in mind, of knowing how your local library works. What are the policies around that? A lot of it is just go in and chat with the library, see even just hear how they make the selections about the materials that are sitting on the shelves, or ebooks if you do ebooks. A lot of really amazing thought and work goes into this. It's not just, picking things willy-nilly. Professional expertise goes into this, and then professional expertise goes into having that conversation with the community around those challenges. But this is where kind of the local flavor is going to come into whether or not, when that challenge is received, whether immediate removal happens or if it's after a process. I wish there was a better answer, but it's very much community-based.
Thank you very much, Kiana. The next question, I'll go ahead and take a stab at. Is there a way to view the entire resolution? Yes, there is a way to view the entire resolution. In the e-blast that many have received about the special call meeting that's going to take place on Saturday and now on Sunday as well. At the bottom of that e-blast, registration information for the call meeting, there is a link to the entire resolution. Okay, so it is there. I might be able to get it into the chat box before the end of this gathering, but beginning tomorrow, you will see that e-blast come out every day until the meetings. Now, we had scheduled a special emergency call meeting on Saturday, but after feedback from the Mid-Atlantic region that has a couple of very special events, installation of a new bishop in Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic region, we're going to also have at this same time, the 4 o'clock hour, another opportunity for people who missed the Saturday to gather, just as Saturday is 11 o'clock a.m. and the Sunday will be at 4 o'clock p.m. So if you've got a conflict in your schedule, can't make the Saturday, it's okay. We'll cover the same information on Sunday. And those, what I'm calling e-blast, should be in your mailbox. You already should have received 1 or 2 by now, but they'll be going out with the additional date on them starting on Monday. And if none of that works, simply write us at leadership@theube.org or kcoleman@theube.org, and we will send you a copy of the resolution. It will be posted to the website as well next week. Next question. I think people are adding questions, so it's moving down without, let me move back up. Okay, has the resolution been submitted? If so, has it been assigned to a committee yet? Committee hearings are already underway. No, yes, we know the committee hearings are already underway. This kind of birth of a resolution on this topic happened late in the game. So when the birth process was beginning, I, as your president of the Union of Black Episcopalians, reached out to Joe McDaniel, who is the resolution person for the deputies of color, and also out to the presidents of the Black deputation, Luke Lawson and Noreen Duncan, and told them there was something in the works. Asked them, was there any possibility? And what they said is, let us see it when it comes out. We'll tell you whether it works. So they have already been sent what we finished as a draft. They got that went out to them on Friday after the executive committee. So they've gotten that. And so they're going to give us feedback to make sure that it is something that is actionable by the deputies of color, or in particular, the Black deputation. And then they will figure out whether or not they're able to handle it. If they're able to handle it, then we'll do whatever it is they need to do after the body has finished looking at it. And then if they're not able to handle it, we'll find another door in. Okay. Going on to the next question, is there a way to, we already did that. Has the resolution been submitted? We did that. Should the resolution ask TEC to condemn the ban on books by local government? Could it is yes. Should it is another question. So we did not entertain that as a possibility for this resolution. Your thoughts about that, Kiana?
Yeah, I think, and I can see both sides, yes and no. I think what might give us a little bit more support and give opportunity for conversation is that local communities be in conversation with their libraries and with their local school boards or library boards to be able to, and yeah, the larger church can condemn book bans, but I think the definition might be just squishy enough that folks would say, oh, this isn't a book ban, so the church doesn't have a place to stand on this. However, we can say that we oppose restrictions to access to information. That gives us a little bit more of a leg to stand on, but I think we can probably get more support if we don't oppose something as opposed to we want to support open access to information. So I'm probably not really answering the question, but I think it's what we can as a church get the most support around. And I think conversation in our local communities and opposition to restricting of access to information.
And that question actually came from Judith Connolly. Judy, did you want to add a comment in response to that? Because we're still.
Am I off of mute now?
Yes, you are, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I did. And what I know from experience with resolutions, there is no real hook or teeth in this resolution that's going to cause people to really take a hard stand. And already the stands have been made. They have been banned in certain areas. So I think it gives the Office of Government Relations more of a foundation to move forward if the whole Episcopal Church says this is wrong. It's not, let's talk about it. It is just absolutely wrong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Well, part of this process of review and input and having this conversation and conversations we'll have this coming weekend is to gather that kind of input. So we will mark that as a potential inclusion and reshaping of the resolution, and then go from there. Thank you very much, Judith. Next question is, how do we move politically from parents being able to remove children from school for a few sex ed classes and other lessons they felt was inappropriate to book bans?
I have absolutely no data to back this up. This is total feels on my part, but I think it's part of a larger attempt to not be part of community. The beauty of public education is that everybody should participate in it, that everyone has access to the same information and the same amount of information, and having access to sexual education to kind of know what your body is doing as a young person, how to maintain your own personal health, the health of your community. Being able to separate your children from that is partly separating your children from being part of community and being a responsible member of that community. Book challenges and book bans are saying we want to either, if we're going to participate in this community, we want to really narrow what that focus is, or we're going to remove ourselves or remove the books. Being in community is hard. Being in community is messy. We're never going to agree, but there is benefit in being in that community and working through our challenges together, and the picking up of balls and children and going off to your own corner doesn't help anything. But again, this is all my spitballing and I have no data to back that up.
I do believe you have some data about the constituency of these groups that are making bans. I remember as part of our conversation at the Virginia Theological Seminary that you mentioned that the composition of these bans is who is it that are behind these actions to ban. Can you say a little something about what the ALA's research has found?
Yeah, a lot of it is, I have to be honest, slightly more conservative groups who don't appreciate the value of diverse communities or diversity in our environments, both racial diversity, but also LGBTQ diversity. And so there are larger national groups like Moms for Liberty and other groups similar to that. But then there are also kind of smaller community groups that are kind of modeled in that image of, and who are putting through these book challenges. And so there's like with all groups, there's probably diversity even within those groups, but there's a particular worldview that the book challenges are definitely kind of mirroring that opposition to diversity in our environment, diversity in our communities.
Do I remember correctly some statistics on a percentage of the books, a fairly large percentage of the books book bans being sought by the same group?
Yeah. There was a recent Washington Post article, maybe 6 months ago, that a group of about 11 people constituted the bulk of book bans or book challenge requests for book challenges across communities. That it is a very organized effort by a small number of individuals. And what happens is that it makes it look like a large majority of the community wants these, as opposed to a well-organized vocal minority of the country. Most people support the open access to information, but if the majority is quiet, the voices that get heard are those who are in support of those book challenges.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question that is related to the one answered earlier: have the Deputies of Color Caucus been alerted about these resolutions? And let me correct that to say this resolution. And to be quite frank with you, we notified again Joe McDaniel, Deputies of Color convener, and we notified the Black deputation chairs and told them something was in the work, but the board did not meet with Kiana until the week of April the 8th to develop this draft, and now we have gotten that in their hands. So I'm sure once they have considered what we have just delivered to them, that they will take some action, and I'm not sure what that is, but we stand behind whatever they feel is and judges in the best interest of the process. So we'll wait to see. Is the national problem mostly still book challenges, or are there more attempts at laws requiring libraries to do X, Y, Z?
Yeah, I think it's they're going on parallel tracks. And right now some of the laws are couched in ways that they don't quite seem like book challenges. So there are, I think it's still on the works in Florida, that there are challenges around teaching anything considered DEI initiatives, and particularly in higher education. I'm a academic librarian, so that's where I kind of keep track of things. And so what that does is that means what can be taught, but it also means then what materials libraries can buy if it's considered something in support of DEI. And again, this may be my catastrophizing, but I think it's one of these things where we have to be really alert to what the laws that are kind of coming through. We can, scoff and laugh that, oh, state X, Y, or Z is trying to restrict funding for DEI initiatives, but what are the downstream impacts of that? Okay, if we can't teach these sorts of things in HR context, what does that mean then for hiring practices and things like that? If DEI can't be taught in any sort of classwork, what does that mean for the skill set that our students get access to? What does that mean for the libraries who are buying materials for departments that don't exist or programs that don't exist? So yeah, the book challenges and the laws that are going into effect are definitely kind of parallel and in many ways feeding each other, and definitely probably supporting each other.
Thank you very much. Let me see. Do you have advice for engaging white allies on the local level?
Yeah, I think it's letting folks, the very first thing is letting people know that these things are happening. As I mentioned, understandably, we're all busy human beings, and if you don't know what's happening in your community, you don't even have the ability to make your voice heard. So talking to our white allies about this, getting in front of them, I'm doing it here in a church setting, but kind of helping everyone know that this is an issue and helping folks recognize that, okay, that it seems to be more affecting one community or one or two communities, but it impacts everyone. Again, that ability to build empathy in our communities relies on each of us being able to hear other people's stories. If certain stories get kind of excised from the community, we can never, as a community, never learn from them. And so our white allies should be equally concerned about that.
And a comment from Ora Houston, which is, as we all know, more now than ever before, it is extremely important to exercise your individual right to vote at the local, state, and national level. Who would have thought we'd have to monitor so closely election to the library board?
It's a thing you really need to know who's on your library board, because the other, getting back to our conversation about laws, is that in some communities, people have tried to introduce laws where the decision-making for what materials are included in your local library is not done by the librarians and library staff in the library, it's done by the library board who's elected. I'm sure they're lovely people, but that is not a skill set that necessarily exists on the library board. And it also provides way too much opportunity for materials to be skewed in a particular direction. The library is intended to support everyone in the community. There's value in having all multiple viewpoints being represented. An elected school board may not have that same sort of commitment to the diversity of ideas in the library.
Isn't it true that there are those of dominant society who don't want their children to feel guilty about the atrocities in which their forebears participated?
Yeah. And I can get that it would be deeply, or I can imagine it would be deeply uncomfortable for folks to know that my great whatever participated in the enslavement of other people, that my relatives participated in these things. That doesn't mean we shouldn't know about it. Our discomfort does not negate history. We are called to learn from our history in order to create a better society. And I think there's that folks need to understand that there's a separation between, I feel bad for what my ancestor did, and I wish they had been better people, and that as a reflection on that person in 2024 as an individual. I'm sure if you go down my lineage somewhere, I shouldn't say this while being recorded, but I'm going to, someone in my family probably did something I'm not going to be proud of. That does not change who I am as an individual. What I am called to do is say, okay, this is what they did in this moment. How might they have done better? What should they have done in order to be better people? So yeah, we can be, and we should feel really guilty and upset about our history. It's only a problem if we then look at that history and we don't make changes for the better. That's where the problem lies.
And then a comment from Roseanne Adderley. I live in a scoff and laugh state. Y'all pray for our Louisiana legislature. That is not shade, it is a serious request. They have a supermajority and plan to rewrite the Constitution this summer. Absolutely. Wherever we're finding situations that only promote greater division and oppression and injustice in our nation, we need to pray about that. But I am going to remind us, the comment that was made earlier is absolutely vital. We must exercise our right to vote while it still is a right to vote. So please, get everybody up, regardless of where they land, it's that right to vote that needs to be exercised. And I have looks like our final comment here from Eric McIntosh. How is it that book banning is possible if we have First Amendment rights of free speech?
Yeah, and this is I'm going to sounds snarky, and perhaps it is, a dance that people do in order to kind of get around that. There's one argument is that libraries as government organizations should have a responsibility to promote certain types of speech, and so it should be wholesome and these sorts of things. Other arguments are that, well, it's not that the materials aren't available at all, it's just not available in this particular place. People could get it someplace else. Again, that's a slippery slope, because then there's also been legislation of the not just removing materials from libraries, but removing them from bookstores. So again, it starts in one place and it's going to slide into someplace else. So freedom of access to information needs to be everywhere, because if it starts one place, it's going to go another place. But I think it's with these even just two different arguments, you can see kind of the complicated dance people do in order to try and justify the restriction to information and restriction to access to books. And as snarky as I am sounding, I think for some people, this might be a real genuine belief that they really think that there's an issue with these books. And I think that's where the being in conversation and being in community is, that it may not be appropriate for you and your family, and that is okay. But we as a community, we're all in this together, and each of us has a different lived experience. I think an example I used when we were together in Virginia is, for a long time, the book, I forget the title of it, but it was about two male penguins who were kind of parenting an egg. And folks were like, well, my family doesn't look like that. Why would I want to have that book available to my kid? There are families who have same-sex parents. They should be able to see themselves in their library as part of their community. Again, just because it's not appropriate or okay, or you're not interested in it, doesn't mean it shouldn't be available for someone else, because it does reflect their life. It does reflect their family.
Thank you again, Kiana. I'm going to ask just one general question before returning it back over to Gabrielle, but I did want to note that there is a link in the chat box that I believe is a link to the resolution, because it's constant contact connected. So blessings and thanksgiving for Robbie, who put that up there for us. So thank you very much. So why can't our librarians just say no? Somebody puts in a request, they get this big, huge list of books to ban. Why is it that they either can't or won't just say no?
And sometimes it does happen, and it probably happens fairly frequently. The problem, not the problem, the hiccup is that each of these challenges needs to be addressed individually. So when you get those bulk challenges, that's just a huge drain on just the system itself. And it's pulling together, even when the ultimate answer is there's been a request to remove this item, the library decides to keep it. There's a lot of legwork that has to happen to talk about why was this particular item chosen, what part of the community it's in support of, if there are any book reviews, professional book reviews that the library reviewed to kind of in support of this particular title. That's just the work for one book. If you get a challenge or a slate of challenges for 400, multiply that times 400. Oftentimes the goal is to overwhelm the system. And so you just get to the point where you throw your hands up and it's like, fine, it's just easier for me to get through my day and not address these. And I think as much as challenges can be difficult, I think challenges are also the opportunity for libraries to be in conversation with their community. And again, these are the people with really good intentions. They're like, okay, why is this particular book in my library? And they can talk to the library staff to say, okay, it may not be useful for you, but this is the community that it's addressing. Sometimes communities get very upset about the large number of materials that are in languages other than English. And they're like, well, why is my library supporting this? I don't read Spanish. And it's like, there's a whole part of your community that does, and the library is intending to support them. And so when things are going well, these book challenges can be an opportunity to have a conversation about how the library makes decisions, how the library is supporting its community. It's just the number has gotten a little out of control, and it's an attempt to overwhelm the system. It's an attempt to shape the conversation for a very vocal minority at the expense of the majority. And this is where we need the majority to be vocal, to say they're supporting their library, to say that they're supporting the tenets of intellectual freedom and access to information. Again, silence is really, really deadly.
Thank you very much, Kiana. I appreciate your being with us. I think we've pretty much covered every question that was in the chat box. Once Gabrielle comes back, or Gabrielle, I can go forward now with the information about the meetings this weekend. You tell me which order you'd like to operate in.
Yes, you can do that first and then we'll close.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, UBE is holding special members-only meetings on Saturday, which has been publicized, and Sunday, which will be publicized beginning tomorrow, for members to come and to have this exact same conversation about the proposed resolution. It does not have a number yet. It has not gone before the Deputies of Color's caucus yet. It is the dream and the hope and the identification of the American Library Association and UBE to say this is an issue that the Episcopal Church needs to look at. So it's our hope that we'll hear back by next week from those offices. We'll gather more input on Saturday. If you do not receive information on registering, all those who are in this call right now will probably receive it because you got the information to be here. But if you do not receive the information about the special meeting, which members only can participate in on Saturday or on Sunday or on both days, where we're going to look at again the resolution, get your input and your feedback, and have what we need, hopefully, to move forward on this issue. So I thank you very much for the opportunity, Gabrielle, to introduce this to the Episcopal Church, to those who are members and non-members alike, and pray that we've identified an issue that hits at the heart of our desire for beloved community and the work of the Episcopal Church to achieve it. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you both, Reverend Kiana and Reverend Kim. I just wanted to thank you, Reverend Kiana, for answering the question about how this is connected to our ministry as Episcopalians. That's really important, I think. And it helps us be able to talk to our allies and to connect it to the faith. So thank you for all your answers, but that one in particular. I want to thank the panelists, the special UBE guests, any past leadership who are here. We acknowledge and thank the past and present leadership of UBE for attending today's Talk to Talk offering. We celebrate you as faithful pioneers and supporters of this organization. You have made and are making UBE what it is today. And thank you all again for your presence. Let us go in peace to serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen.